I knew this short Royal Caribbean weekend cruise would probably be loud, busy, and a little chaotic. That part didn't surprise me. What surprised me was how often I found myself thinking the same thing. This cruise looks premium, so why does so much of it feel average? And that for me became the whole review, because this ship absolutely knows how to impress you at first. It looks exciting, it feels huge, it has that bold, flashy, newer Royal Caribbean energy where you walk in and immediately think, okay, this could be really good. And on paper, it should be. This is one of Royal Caribbean's newer Oasis-class megaships, built to wow you with huge neighborhoods, big entertainment, and more to do than most people can fit into a weekend. If you've never seen one of these ships in person, they are hard to explain until you're standing there. This thing is 1,188 feet long, which is longer than 3 football fields, basically almost 5 Boeing 747s lined up nose to tail. So the real question for me was never whether we could have fun. We did. The real question was whether the ship actually delivered enough to justify what we paid for a quick weekend cruise. And by the end, I really don't think it did. Now, to be fair, I booked this mainly to spend time with family, and that part was really great. We had fun, my daughters had fun, we made great memories, so I do not want to act like this whole trip was miserable, because it definitely wasn't. But if you're thinking about booking this cruise, there are a few things I think you should know first. And even if you've never cruised before, or never planned to, but you're just curious what one of these big flashy weekend sailings actually feels like, I think this trip was a pretty good example of both the appeal and the trade-offs. This was a 3-night Royal Caribbean sailing with Coco Cay on day 2, Nassau on day 3, and then back to Miami on day 4. The appeal is real. The ship is big in a way that feels exciting. The public spaces are colorful, the neighborhoods are impressive. There are definitely moments where you stop, look around and think, okay, Royal is showing off a little here. And honestly, fair enough. Some parts of the ship are genuinely beautiful. One of the smartest things we did on Embarcation Day was pack swimsuits in a carry-on backpack because we went straight to the water slides before luggage ever got to the rooms. That was a huge win. The lines were almost non-existent. My daughter loved it, and it ended up being one of the best parts of that first afternoon. So yes, I completely understand why a ship like this sells people. But the problem with this cruise was not the sales pitch. The problem was the follow-through, because almost immediately the little details started breaking the illusion. There was a really strong perfume scent in some hallways that I personally did not like. It didn't smell subtly clean. It smelled more like they were trying a little too hard to cover something up. Then there was general cleanliness. Not horrible everywhere, not some complete disaster, but enough random little things to stand out. Food on the ground, limes on the floor, bits of mess that kept making me think I expected better. And then the whole muster check-in situation happened. If you've never cruised before, muster is the required safety check you have to complete before the ship can sail. So this is not something you want to get wrong. We had to go back multiple times because even though we had already done the check-in, the app kept showing that countdown timer like we still weren't checked in. The captain is making announcements telling people to finish muster. The app still looks like we're not done, and when we went back to sort it out, they were basically dismissive and told us we were fine and to ignore it. It wasn't some huge disaster, but it was a bit stressful, annoying, and exactly the kind of small, unnecessary friction you do not want on day 1. And that mattered because it set the tone. And nowhere did that matter more than the cabin. Now, before I sound too negative, there actually were things I really liked about this room. The storage was better than I expected. The TV was surprisingly big, and the shower itself I actually liked. Good size, decent door. The water pressure was honestly kind of insane in a good way. So the cabin was not all bad, but it had way too many issues for me to call it good. The first one was no bar soap in my room. And I know it sounds small, but on a cruise, hygiene matters. Soap matters. And what made it more annoying was that another room in our group did have bar soap, did have a soap holder, and even had a shower dispenser set up that my room didn't have. So now it's not just missing soap, it's inconsistency. Then I started noticing other things. There was weird white stuff all on the walls, like powder or dust. Later, I found a black hair in a supposedly fresh towel. The shower base had this peeling area with black-looking grime. As the cruise went on, there was black stuff coming out around the shower floor area, along with a smell that was just not good, kind of sewage-like. The sink also didn't drain well, and every time the toilet flushed or the faucet ran, you could hear water moving under the peeling up shower floor. At first, I thought maybe this was just one random issue, but once you start stacking all of that together, missing soap, hair in the towel, black stuff in the shower, bad smell, sink drainage, weird wall residue, it felt like the cabin just wasn't being maintained or checked the way it should have been. And then there was the door. This was one of those things I really think future cruisers should know because it's more of a safety issue than just an annoyance. Our cabin door did not reliably close on its own unless it was opened all the way back or pushed fully shut. If you just went in normally and let it swing shut, it could look closed without actually being fully shut. On a weekend sailing with a more party-heavy crowd, I think that's a legitimate thing to pay attention to. You really do need to physically make sure your door is closed and locked. The walls also felt pretty thin. You could hear conversations way too easily, which is not exactly the bonus feature I'm looking for in an interior cabin. And then there was the nightlight. This is the cabin issue that bothered me the most. At night, it was basically like having a dim phone flashlight pointed at your face. The same white-blue kind of light. I personally like a dark room when I sleep, really dark, and that light was genuinely bothersome. I'm the kind of person who will even shove a little piece of toilet paper into the peephole because hallway light bugs me at night. So yeah, I noticed it. A subtle, warm light down by your feet with a motion sensor would make way more sense than this white flashlight effect when you open your eyes at night. It didn't ruin the cruise, but it did tell me something important. This room had enough positives to keep me from hating it, but not enough quality control to make me trust it. And honestly, that same thing carried into the service. I want to be fair here because I do not think this was a ship with horrible service across the board. That would be unfair. Some crew were genuinely nice. Guest services was excellent both times we went. Our room steward, Theo, was nice, wrote down what we needed, and handled things politely. The Adventure Ocean staff we interacted with were great, and my daughter really enjoyed that program. We also had some great service in places like the Mason Jar, and breakfast one morning in Johnny Rockets was actually a really nice experience. But the overall service vibe on the sailing felt kind of burned out. That's the best way I can describe it. Not horrible effort, not people refusing to help, but a noticeable lack of friendliness, warmth, and energy in too many interactions. Some staff felt cold, some felt dismissive, some felt like they were just trying to survive the weekend crowd. And honestly, I kinda get it. A short sailing like this probably brings some exhausting passengers. Lots of turnover, lots of demand, lots of entitlement. I can understand why crew on these sailings might seem worn down. But from the perspective of a guest, you feel it. A rude reply when asking about soap, a breakfast host who didn't seem happy to seat people, a popcorn interaction where the employee just pointed at the price instead of speaking, a main dining room interaction that felt weirdly defensive when I asked a simple question. None of these by themselves would define the cruise, but together they definitely add up. Food landed in a very similar place for me. Not bad, not amazing, just not strong enough to rescue the value conversation. There were some pleasant surprises. On Embarcation Day, I tried freshly cut roast beef in the Windjammer that actually impressed me. Windjammer also handled crowds better than I expected. Main dining room breakfast and Johnny Rockets complimentary breakfast were both kind of underrated. Dinner in the main dining room was more mixed. I liked the atmosphere. The dim lighting was nice. It had that familiar cruise dining room feel. But we were packed pretty tight, and the food itself was solid enough without ever feeling especially polished. So food was not a disaster. It was just not moving the needle enough for how much this cruise cost. And that's what kept happening on this sailing. There would be enough good to keep me interested, but not enough excellence to make me feel good about the price. Now, the one venue that really did stand out for me was the Mason Jar. That may have been my favorite spot overall on this ship. The vibe was very good every time, the drinks were excellent, and the atmosphere was strong. And honestly, it never felt overwhelmingly crowded. It felt lively without feeling chaotic. That was a big win. And then there's Central Park. At night, Central Park was exactly what I wanted this ship to feel like more often. Relaxing, calm, good music, great atmosphere, just a really nice place to slow down. I also love that the plants are real. That detail matters. It gives the ship a more elevated feeling than a lot of the little maintenance issues did. So that's what made this cruise feel so conflicting. It kept doing this weird thing where one part would let me down, and another part would immediately remind me why Royal is so good at creating memorable spaces. And nowhere was that more true than the entertainment. This is the category where Royal still absolutely crushes it. The Aqua Show was a highlight. And little tip here, if it looks sold out before you board, check again once you're connected to the ship Wi-Fi because reservations can open back up. If you get a chance, reserve it. It's one of the best entertainment experiences at sea. Period. The live music in Central Park was great. The promenade dance party was crazy in a fun way. The boys versus girls event in Studio B had a lot of energy. Even some of these smaller included activities. The carousel, the archery setup, the slides, ping pong, Adventure Ocean. There's just a lot to do on this ship. That's something Royal genuinely nails. They know how to create momentum. They know how to create spectacle. They know how to make people feel like there's something always happening. And if entertainment is one of your top priorities, that is a major reason to book a ship like this. And honestly, that's what makes this review harder, because the ship is not boring, the ship is not ugly, the ship is not empty. If anything, the problem is that it sells the feeling of a premium experience better than it delivers the details of one. But the ship itself was only part of the experience. The other part was the crowd. And this is where I think it helps to separate crowds from passenger vibe, because they are not really the same thing. In terms of crowds and space, I'd say this cruise was manageable but not great. Some areas definitely felt packed, especially the promenade during certain times, some food venues, and the jacuzzis. But there were also places that handled the numbers better than I expected. The Windjammer never felt as bad as I thought it would. Taking the stairs instead of elevators helped a lot. And on port days, especially if you stay on the ship, everything gets way more relaxed. The solarium in particular was a really nice break from the chaos. So in terms of pure crowding, I wouldn't call it awful. Busy, yes. Overwhelming all the time? No. The passenger vibe just really wasn't for me. Again, I knew what I was getting into. Short weekend sailing, spring break timing, lively crowd, party energy, none of that shocked me. But there's a difference between expecting it and actually enjoying it. Some of the passengers were rude, some were obnoxious, and some of the kid behavior was exactly the kind of stuff that makes a packed cruise feel more annoying than it should. At one point, there was a kid in a packed elevator secretly hitting the open door button over and over while everybody thought people outside kept calling the elevator. It sounds small and honestly kind of dumb, but it perfectly captured the vibe on the sailing. Now, to be fair, if you want a lively, short party cruise, you might actually rate the passenger vibe higher than I would. Some people want that high energy atmosphere. It just really wasn't my kind of crowd. And I think that's really what this comes down to. If you want a short, flashy, high energy getaway and you care most about having a lot to do, you may like this more than I did. But if you're paying this kind of price and expecting it to feel polished all the way through, that's where I think this cruise gets a lot shakier. Because when people ask whether a cruise is worth booking, they're not just asking about the ship. They're asking what kind of experience they're stepping into. And on this sailing, the answer felt pretty clear. This was a cruise where the ship itself often felt better than the overall experience surrounding it. And then you add in the constant upselling. This was another thing that stood out more than I wanted it to. Paid sauna, paid cycle class, spa offers, foot analysis sales tactics, app schedules pushing treatments. Even little charges like popcorn start to stand out when the cruise already feels expensive. The app being buggy didn't help either. Not unusable, just glitchy enough to be annoying. So by the end of the sailing, I kept coming back to the same conclusion. Did I have an amazing time with family? Absolutely. That was the best part of the cruise, easily. Spending time together, making memories, hanging out, playing games, that part was genuinely special. But if I strip away the family element and look at this purely as the product I paid for, the value just wasn't strong enough. And that is where this whole review lands for me. We booked 2 interior cabins for our family. Each cabin was $1,249.04. Parking was $110.25. Gratuities were $18.50 per person per day, and even with $50 of onboard credit per cabin, our onboard statement still came out to about $125. So once everything was added up, we were around the mid 200s per person per day for this trip. That's why the value question kept hanging over the whole cruise for me, because that is a lot of money for a quick weekend cruise, especially for interior cabins. And this is the part people need to hear more often. A cruise can still be fun and still not be worth the price. If you want my free guide on how to avoid overpaying for cruises like this, it's linked below. So after all of that, here's where I landed. For the cabin, I'd give it a 5.5 out of 10. Some real positives, but too many maintenance, cleanliness, and design issues. For food and drinks, a 6.5 out of 10. Decent overall, with a few pleasant surprises and some standout venues. For service, a 6 out of 10. Mostly functional, occasionally good, but not as friendly or warm as I wanted. For entertainment, an easy 9 out of 10. This is still where Royal is elite. For crowds and space, a 6 out of 10. Busy, packed sometimes, but not a total nightmare. For passenger vibe, a 5 out of 10. Maybe higher if this is your kind of weekend crowd, but for me, not really. And for value, a 5.5 out of 10. For the cheapest interior cabin I could get, I expected more. So overall, I'd give this cruise a 6.5 out of 10. And honestly, I think that score sums it up pretty well. We had a great family trip. It was real fun. The family time was real, but so was the gap between how premium this cruise looked and how average too much of it actually felt. And if I'm judging this as a cruise product I paid for, not just the memories we made, I do not think this one earned the price. If this same cruise had been meaningfully cheaper, I probably would feel different. But at this price point, I just expected more.